Hey everyone, and welcome to this little video about lights in the wildlife sandbox and how and what I do to improve the look of my scenes. So this will be more for me just, freestyling and showing you some of the stuff I do, explaining some of the attributes on these lights and when I use which and stuff like that. So this video might be like maybe 20 minutes long, I don't know, you'll see anyway. And so yeah, let's get started. The first thing that I want to show you here is the lights tab in the sandbox. So down here you have the light bulb, and this is where the lights are at. In here there's only three different essential types of lights. That is the point light, the area light, and the spotlight. And then there's these three other things, the fireplace, the torch, and the candle. But these are just inheriting from point lights and adding a mesh to it, so internally it's just point lights. So we'll ignore these for now. So let's begin quickly with a point light. I went ahead and placed one in here. Currently it's all still using the default settings. And yeah, just placed it a little bit here in front of her so we get nice little speck reflections on her eyes and lips, and everything looks nicely lit. So this would be something like what I would consider a start, to make a screenshot or something. So let's go into the slide and see what we can do to improve it a little bit and see what the settings do. So intensity, everybody knows, let's just make the light more or less intense. The default is 10, and I generally always end up lowering it to some amount. And for now, let's maybe choose something like 8, I think. It looks slightly less overblown. Attenuation. So let me tell you what I do about attenuation. Attenuation is one of those really performance-defining attributes. So this is the distance in centimeters that the light has an effect on. So any point beyond 800 centimeters from this light is not going to get any effect from the light. And this is at pretty much at the software level. So this is pretty interesting to save performance. So if you have, let's say, 10 lights, all of them with 800, and they overlap a lot, causing lots of overlapping shadows and all stuff like that, this will be much slower than if you lower this number and reduce the amount of overlaps happening from the light. So what I like to do when I do something like, scene or whatever, it's just for good measure, I like to lower this to the minimum that I possibly can. So for example, if I lower it to 100, obviously this is probably not enough because now it's barely shining on anything here. So let's maybe pick 400. It's like the half of 800. And this is already cool, we have her shined on, and this is pretty much the same effect on her as 800. So let me show you the comparison between 400 and 800. And you can see it changed pretty much nothing on her. It just shined on more of the surrounding. So putting this to 400 already saves us some performance. Next up, what comes into play with this is the fall off exponent, which will basically tell you the amount of, or the strength of the fading of light. So if I put this number to 0, we can see I got a little bit of a bug here. Maybe let's not do 0, let's do something like, something like 0.01. You can see that now this is like a little bit less than 4 meters because the center of the sphere is up here. But I can see if I put it like here, this is about a 4-meter radius of light. And the effect, actually let me just undo that. The effect is there's light in here and it's on, and then outside of it it's off. And it's pretty hard, a pretty hard corner or border. It's a hard border. So increasing this, you can see will slowly start to fade in the darkness around. And the more we increase this, the faster the light fades out, and the less the effect on the surroundings becomes. Now this is quite a non-physical approach. So this is pretty much what you would call a linear approach. And but still, it looks cool anyway. So there is also a value in here that is probably quite approximate of the real physical value, depending on the light source, I guess. I'm not that of an expert. But what I like to put it on is probably something like 4, so I get pretty much most of my light without it having almost no effect too soon, while still having a high attenuation, which then actually will still cause objects in there to increase performance, I think. So let's put that to 400. Let's put this at 4. That's pretty cool. Nice. And let's continue. So we talked about Then next is the source radius. All the lights have this. And this is something that we can look at the effect if you look at the specks of reflection in her eyes or her lips, for example. And if I have the source radius and put it to 1, you can see this point is really small now. And if I slide it up more and more, you can see, wrong attribute. If I slide it up, you can see how it's becoming bigger and bigger and bigger until it also becomes weaker, because the amount of light it emits depends on the surface. So if you increase the surface, then per square millimeter, let's say, there will be less light happening. So this is also being accounted for in here. And I can make this a lot big. And you can see also how it starts to affect the actual skin and the way it reflects and behaves to the light. And this is also something you can play around with if you want, to make scenes look a specific way. For now, let's maybe pick a value of 25. Okay. Then the next thing is quickly volumetric scattering. Now this is happens only with if you have volumetrics on. Currently I have the cloud coverage set to maximum, which will introduce lots of fog. If I turn it off, you can see there's less fogging happening. Let's turn it on here for now. I'm going to turn it off later. And just increase the volumetric scattering, which will increase the effect of the light on the fog. Now I can see we have a little sphere of light affecting this area. But you can see these two boxes here, they are completely ignored by this, and it's just, happening everywhere. Also the character. So that's where this attribute comes in, the volumetric shadows, which is currently off. You turn it on, and now you can see objects actually cast shadows on the volumetrics of the light. And that's a pretty cool effect, if you want to increase the depth of a scene, you want to make it a little bit more fancy, you can use this. But yeah, you have to be a bit mindful, because fast movements, you can see starting to see some artifacts here, because the engine can't keep up with generating these volumetric fog shadow particles or whatever. So that's something to keep in mind. For now, let's just turn this off, default this, and go back to 0 cloud coverage. Okay. The last attribute here that I want to talk about on this slide is the shadow bias. So if you zoom into her face, for example, you can see we have some weird artifacts happening here. There's some light entering this nose here, and there's some strange stuff happening here. And that has to do with the shadow bias. This attribute basically tells you how much surface detail is affected by shadow, or it's casting shadow, or something like that. So the higher values here will make it that less details are being introduced to the shadow. So if I put this to 1, you can see now that it's even worse. That this nose is just casting a fragmented shadow here. And I can basically go above 1, and it's becoming worse and worse, until eventually, when we hit something like 10 almost, or 20 or whatever, there's pretty much no more shadow happening, right? So nothing is casting a shadow. There is still the shadow or the shaded areas of points on the surface pointing away from the light. Those then just naturally don't pick up light. This is a different type of calculation than the casted shadows. So for now, let's put this back to default and let's see what we can do by lowering this value. So the default is 0.5, let's maybe go to 0.2. And now I can see we fixed a bunch of things here. But now we start to see these little lines happening. And if you lower this even more, you can see more and more of these lines are appearing. Let's go to like something like this. And now I can really see the problem is that every single face of this model, so this model is not infinitely smooth, it's made of a finite amount of flat faces, triangles. And each of these triangles then is starting to become more affected by the shadow and actually introducing its own, shading on itself and on the neighbors and stuff like that. So it's at some point you really start to see the topology of the character pop through. So this light, the point light, I generally try to not go below 0.2. Sometimes 0.2 works fine, and you have to play around with this a little bit. It's not something the fall of exponents affects, but it could be something that the radius. Yeah, you can see the radius. The source radius is actually affecting this a little bit. So if I lower this to 5 or 4, 5, you can see the noise is almost gone here. And 25 starts to introduce this a little bit more, and maybe 50 will be even more intense. And let's go all the way to 150. Yeah, at some point it just sort of stops getting worse. Let's keep it at 10. I guess 10's okay. It starts to appear in here. You can almost see it, but it's almost okay. Yeah, well, that's it, I guess, for the point light. Let's just hide this for now. And place the next one that I want to talk about, which is the area light. So the area light is very similar to the point light. It has two major differences. First is that it's basically where the point light affects a full sphere, the area light affects like half a sphere. And the second difference is that the point light is just a point and the area light is an actual area, a plane. So you can see it illustrated by this shining plane here. There's another difference here, which is in the intensity, where the point light uses just linear units, and very small ones of that. The area light here uses physical units, which are much bigger values. But technically, they were pretty much the same. So you just lower this number if you want to make the light less bright. So let's do that. Let's go to like 1,000, which I think is a better value for something like this. It already looks much more natural here, as opposed to the quite overblown 5,000. Let's go back here. Attenuation is pretty much the same. You want to keep this as low as possible, so you can, make your scene more efficient. Let's go to like 200. You can see 200 pretty much changed nothing on her, so it's pretty cool. Next thing up is the light width and height, which let's move the camera over here. Will change the shape of this square, of this rectangle, and you can pretty much make any sized rectangle you want. Of course, there's an interesting thing I didn't really consider what would happen if we increase the light width to an amount that is bigger than the attenuation, because internally it's still just casting a point of light. So yeah, you can see it's even though this light goes all the way to back here, it stopped shining on this box here at the unit specified of 200. So let's not go to that here. Let's just put it back here somewhere there. Okay, and put the camera back on her. So let's pick some. Let's just go back to the defaults here real quick and then show you, for example, the effect. Let's see here on her eye. You can see the plane, the square shape, and if I change this, for example, the width, now I can see a new shape appearing, and it's actually reflecting the line. And I can also go the other way, you know, do this, and I get a line like that. Or I can go basically big, and at some point it will lose, you know, power, because it's the intensity that we pick here gets distributed over the area, and the bigger the area, the less light comes out of each individual point, and the less effect light has. So if you want to make, you know, huge lights like this, you will also have to increase the intensity a little bit. Okay, but let's not do that. Let's just go back to 1000 and do something like 12. Okay. Other than this light is pretty much the same. It has one additional attribute here, which is the show light mesh, which you can do to just hide this thing if you don't want to see it, because otherwise it's just going to be in the level physically. The other thing is the shadow bias, which behaves pretty much similarly to the point light. We can go to like 0.2, and 0.1 is where it starts to, you know, fall apart. You can now see here these little lines appearing. You can play around a little bit with the thresholds. 0.15 is a bit better. You can slightly, maybe you cannot see it in the video, maybe you can. It's starting to appear here. 0.2 pretty much almost didn't have that, so let's just keep 0.2 for now. And other than that, it's pretty much the same. But the cool thing that I will show you later a bit more is that this light has a nice look on models if the wetness is high. You can sort of see it here in the lips, but let's just pick up this the customizer here, go to the skin, and ump the wetness on the skin. Let's go to maybe like here. And now you can really see the shape of the light being reflected, and it's actually visible on the model. So if you go back to the light and play around with this shape a bit, you know, to something like this sort of thing, you sort of get a really nice look on these wet reflections, and it starts to look more organic than, you know, just having something like this, where it just kind of looks a bit boring, you know. So let's do this real quick, boop, boop. And it looks a bit nicer, I think. And of course, if you change the sizes like this, you might want to increase the intensity again to get a similar amount of shine. But now let's it looks nice and like really wet, you know. Looks more in the world sort of thing. And I'll show you a trick that I sometimes do for area lights. If I find the wet reflections on characters to be a bit weak because the surrounding level doesn't have enough impact on them, but that a little bit later. For now, let's just hide this thing here, or let's go to her and put the skin back to, you know, a little bit lower wetness. And let's use the last light, my favorite light, the spotlight. Let's put it in a similar position to the other two lights here, something like up here, and then let's just aim it down a bit, like so. Okay. So the spotlight is technically very similar to the point light, except that instead of shining in a whole sphere around itself, it shines in one direction. And that direction is dictated, if I deselect it, by the thick right arrow that is on the icon. You can see if I rotate it, the arrow points somewhat the direction, and that's where the light's pointing at. So this is also an aspect that makes this light a bit more performant than the point light, because it has to do less calculations of light, because it doesn't have to calculate all directions but just one. And this is also a reason why this light is so much better when it comes to shadows. And I'm going to show you that here in a minute. First, let's lower the attenuation to maybe 200. No, that's a bit too low. Let's just go to the 400 that we had on the point light. And the fall of exponents to 4. Okay. Now you can see on this slide, actually I can show you another attribute that I haven't talked about yet, which is deep transmission, which is just a checkbox down here, and you can turn it off, and you can see the effect here that it has. What deep transmission does is it feeds the materials that use subsurface scattering with light information to do subsurface calculations. So if you turn this on, the light will emit the information the materials require to produce subsurface scattering results. Now, you can see that this is not really looking that nice. You know, we have these weird straight lines and everything looks kind of splotchy and a little bit buggy in here. And this has to do with the shadow bias. Now, this shadow bias at 0.5 that did quite an okay job on the other two lights. Here it's completely useless. So with this one, we have to lower it a lot more. First, let's go a bit higher. Let's see a value of 1. You know, it just destroys it a little bit more, but it's pretty much equally shit. So let's just lower it and see what happens. And you can see pretty much the same effect from the point light, but it's happening at a much lower number. So you can see we're at 0.0, sorry, up to 2. We're at 0.02. At this point, in a point or an area light, this model would be completely destroyed with the shadows. But here it's looking alright. We've got some noise, we can see some of the faces of the actual model appearing. So maybe 0.02 is a bit too low. Let's go to 0.05. It's about this is my favorite value for spotlights, is 0.05, because it still applies nice. You know, even this strand of hair is casting shadow now. The nose is also casting a nice shadow, and it's also, you know, the nostril is not really that lit up in here, so everything looks pretty cool. The other attribute that can affect this even more and improve it is the cone angle. So the cone angle dictates the angle at which the light shines, and this is also basically defines the amount of surface that is covered by the light. So currently it's set to 44. In order to visualize this, let me quickly increase the fog here with the cloud coverage and increase the volumetric scattering here a little bit more. Boom. Okay. So now you can see the angle. So this angle here from this line to this line, that's about 44 degrees. And the distance at which this stuff stops taking effect around here, that is these 400 attenuation. Now, this I don't know exactly how these calculations work, but this effect also affects the quality of the shadows, because the shadows will be lower resolution the higher this angle becomes, because it needs to distribute the resolution that it has for the shadows to a bigger surface. So if I increase this, let's zoom in on her. Actually, let's revert this stuff because we don't need it. If I increase this, you can see how the shadows are becoming less sharp. And this is also a tool you could use. You know, maybe you want smoother shadows. Then you can use this, you know. Or you can use in combination with the shadow bias. But the shadow bias eventually will introduce shit like this, where the things just stop casting shadows. So let's keep this at 0.05 and play around with this cone angle. And you can see that the soft shadows. Oh, and one last thing here. Let's quickly look at the transmission. This shadow bias, here we clearly can see this transmission causing some dumb issues. Put this on 0.05 and these problems are completely gone and transmission is still active. You can still see some effect here happening on the subsurface scattering front. So if you want sharper shadows, what you can also do is aim the light specifically at the point that you want and just lower the cone angle, and you can see how the shadows are becoming sharper and sharper. Let's do something like this. And now let's move the light so that it's a bit more aimed on the face here. And now you can see some really sharp shadows happening here everywhere. And if I lower this shadow bias now a little bit more, let's see what happens. It's sort of not really doing much now anymore. And at 0.01 it starts to show the model stuff again. So let's go back to 0.05. But you can still see this is a nice sharp shadow. So good stuff. And this is basically then what I do in order to make my scenes really pop is I use the spotlights instead of any other lights, and I really lower this shadow bias to 0.05, so I get nice crisp shadows. And now you can see how these hairs are casting really nice shadows on the skin here. Then additionally to that, you can see here, for example, here on the cheek, you can see how the shadow here is kind of like oddly sharp. Now we can probably lower this or lower the effect by increasing the cone angle to maybe like 33, but it didn't do that much. It did a nice job at sharpening this shadow, but not so much this one, because this is not a casted shadow, it's just a shadow of the surface here turning away from the direction at which the light is coming from, and therefore getting less shadow. So it's a different type of shadow calculation. Let's put this to 33 and see what we can do about this. And this is something we can fix, or at least improve, let's say, because there's not really fixing, it's just, you know, personal taste if you like this look or not. But what you can do to soften this a bit more is introduce a bigger source radius. So you can see if I increase this number, how these shadows are becoming softer. And you can also see the pores. If I zoom in a lot here, you can see here to the point where you can actually see pores of the character. Let's do something like here. This is really close now. This is ridiculously close. Nobody's going to ever do this. But just to show the effect. And we lower the source radius. You can see how these things are starting to... They're actually casting shadows here. Or no, it's not casting shadows. This is just shaded. This is self-shading, so to speak. There's a difference. And if I increase this, they are becoming smoother. Right, so they're no longer that visible. Right, so there's also a sweet spot at which, you know, you get the best of both worlds, I think. So if I had you can see the source radius at something like 2, produces really sharp things in here, and this kind of looks a bit weird, and you know, maybe undesirable. Let's see. But if we, you know, let's increase this almost tenfold to 25. And this is looking much softer. And also this side here now looks a bit nicer. Okay, so the source radius at 25 did a good job in here. Now you can see the reflection on the eye also changed a little bit. Put it back to 5. You can see it's a much smaller, sharper point. It's also brighter. Put it to 25. And the brightness of the point has become much lower, and the size is a bit much higher. But the effect on the rest of the skin has also become a bit nicer, I think. It's become even more noticeable again, like with the area light. If I select this model and ump the wetness a bit, you can see it's something like here. And now I can see here this nice big effect of the spotlight. So put this back to 5. Now we get this, you know, little shiny point that looks a bit like a sun maybe. And if you increase this to 25, it becomes a bit of a surface, you know, like some closer reflecting object. Not reflecting, just object that affects the reflection, so to speak. Let's put it to like 55 maybe. And now you can see it's become an even different look. It's like she's in a room and she's facing an open window, you know, with quite wet skin, around the open window. And this is basically how the things I use to control a bit the look of my scenes. Now let's hide this. Yes. And let's look at a couple of examples here that I have for you. The first one is a comparison between the the default spotlight. So this is a spotlight in this position, and this is a completely default one. Like every single value is exactly how it comes out when I put it in on this editor here. And you can see it's quite bright. It's got these issues with low shadow qualities, with the transmission and the subsurface scattering being a bit bugged. It's not producing very interesting reflections on the character. It's got a very boring color. It's just white. And now let's quickly swap it out for an edited one that I did. And this is at the exact same position. So you can see here, if I select these two, they are the same position. But this one is looking now much nicer. So I've got a warmer color in here. I lowered the intensity a little bit to not overshine the character too much. Lowered the attenuation a bit to make it more performant. I increased the source radius to produce these interesting reflection shapes on the character. I also lowered the cone angle and the shadow bias to improve the shadow quality here. You can see nicely here. And I think that's it. Yeah, and also the fall off exponent, so that I have a bit more efficient use of the light at the expense of physical accuracy. But whatever, you know, if it looks good, it looks good. And that's it for this, right? So this is just a couple of little tweaks that I did to, you know, turn this into this. And yeah, I think the difference here speaks for itself. So that's this example. The next one here is just sort of like a basic use case for 3 spotlights. You know, it's I have 3 of them here. Let's see where they are. One is over here, shining. Let's put it maybe like here. And then I have a couple of other ones that produce something like let's do something like this and like this. Let's give this one also a cooler color, like so. Okay, and now if there was like a moon here behind it, it would be sort of make more sense with these light setups here. You know, we got the nice rim here on her shoulders. Maybe this one here is a bit too strong. Let's see, they're both at 4. This one could probably be a bit more intense, like so. Like so. For now, let's just lower this wetness a bit more. Let's grab the front one. And now you can see the nose is no longer casting shadow, but this is not really because of anything, because I have the shadow bias quite low, and you could lower the cone angle a little bit, but it wouldn't make much of a difference because this light is pretty much shining directly towards us, so there is not really much for the nose to cast on, you know, except for like itself. If you look down here, this part is nicely shaded. Other than that, you know, you can see the shadows here in the hair start to appear. This area here also looks pretty cool, where this outfit, you know, is producing the proper shadow into the cleavage here, and you know, stuff like that. So that's this. One cool thing that I used to do for lights, well, this is currently a little bit of a fail. Let me quickly correct that. So what I do is I put the lights in a group, or at least specific sets of lights. Put the group pivot at the center of the object or character or anything that I want to have in the focus here. So, and then I put the lights back in. And what this allows me to do is, you know, if I want to change this effect a little bit, I can just rotate this group, and all the lights rotate, and you will basically be able to really quickly change the vibe of your your scene here by just rotating one group around your object of focus, instead of having to manually, reposition all the lights or create new lights or do stuff like that. So that's also pretty cool. And you can rotate this group in any form you want, and you can see what sort of looks you can create. And you have some pretty cool effect here that you can discover by playing around with things like this really quickly and get new types of look that you want for your character. Let me just quickly undo these rotations to this. Okay. Anyway, but that was this example. And lastly, actually, hide all this. I want to show you a little trick that I found to improve the reflections on wet characters. So if I turn on this group, now this is a bit of an overkill, but there's a whole lot of area lights in here. Let's show all of them. Boom. And you can see this is quite a soft light. It looks a bit similar to the other one. It has a bit of a different color, and it's a bit more shining from all directions. Let's zoom out a little bit, and we can see the amount of lights that I have here. Let me just quickly grab all of these and show you the light shape, the mesh. And you can see how these are scaled. And you can see that it's basically a whole array of lights just shining on her. And all of them have slightly different shapes and colors and whatnot. And also different intensities. And what this creates is a nice and very, flat surround light effect. Now all of these lights have cast shadows on, so this will make them really heavy. But it will also improve the look of the scene. So I can turn it off, and the effect isn't even that big, but it becomes visible in areas, like for example here underneath the armpit, where it actually should be quite shaded, and now it's just shining. And if I turn it on, this area becomes what you would expect it to. Same with like the cleavage, for example. If I look here into the cleavage and turn the shadows off, it's not as intense as we saw in the armpit, but it still has it's lacking that specific little shadow from the outfit here. So let's keep shadows on, because here right now I'm not really that worried about the performance of the scene. I'm more worried about the look of it. But we could probably achieve something like this. Let me just hide all of these things here again, because we don't want to see them. Could probably achieve something like this with a lot less lights, and it will probably look even better, because there won't be so many shadows here fighting each other. Although the shadows do quite a nice job of overriding each other with the other lights, and eventually there will be not as many shadows visible as lights you will have. But still, the beauty of this little dome of light trick is when you want to make wet skin. And if I up this here to like maybe so, now you can see the effect, and you can see these shapes here, these random shapes appearing on the skin and creating this nice wet look that looks like it's in a room, and the room's got a bunch of lights or shapes or windows or anything like that, and it's reflecting, and it's producing these nice wet looking shapes on the skin reflection. And as a comparison, so let's say quickly select all of these and hide, and now quickly just select all of these and show. With 3 lights, there's just 3 spotlights. You can see it looks like this, and it's okay. It doesn't look too bad, but it's a bit boring. There's not much happening here in the skin. It looks a bit underwhelming. So let's hide this and show this again. Boom. And here we can see much more things happening, and it's nice and interesting to look at the skin now and see the way it reacts to the light, and how the shapes here actually affect the look on the skin, and it looks a bit more real, more more in the level. And obviously it came at the expense of performance a lot, because they have a ton of lights here. What I could probably do to optimize this, because currently each of these lights is casting shadows, is to turn off shadows for the weakest ones. So let's see quickly here. We have this one at 400. So probably this one could be shadows off. What is this one? 1000. Another 400. Let's turn shadows off for him too. 300. Yeah, that can definitely go away. Not much to see there. For another 400. Boom. 600. Let's keep 600. 800 is fine. 1000 is fine. 13 is fine. 1 is fine. 400. And okay, let's just kill this 400. Boom. Okay, and so I killed a bunch of shadows on these lights, and the look on the scene didn't change much. You know, the armpit is still nice and shaded here. Same with the cleavage in here. But I probably gained a bunch of frames from doing this. So that is something you could keep in mind. You could probably go even more selective here by, you know, just hiding all shadows, and then just turn it on for the strongest lights. This could also be a trick. So let's see what I have here. 1200. Let's turn it on for this one. Let's ignore 1000 for now. 13. Let's put it on for this one. Let's ignore the 1000. Okay, 12 here. Okay, this one was the really offensive one for the armpits here, so we took care of that one. The cleavage here is not getting shadow from this area now, so maybe let's see if we pick this one. Which one is this? Hard to select now. These cubes can go away. Oh wait, they're unselectable. Lol. Have to turn this off. Okay, there we go. This one has 600. Let's see what happens if I turn this on. Helped a little, but not too much. See if we have a stronger one in here. This one is 1000. I think this one would be good. So if we turn this one shadow on, yeah, now we can see this is cool here. Very nice. And now the scene has become a lot faster, because not even half the lights are casting shadows now, but it also has become a bit less accurate, less pretty, you know, because there's some things now shining basically to the other side of the model that normally shouldn't. So if I turn the shadows all on, you can see here, if I undo this, it has a certain, you know, effect. Probably hard to say if it's even good or better, but I did like it more with all of them on. So yeah, I think that's it. Oh Jesus, this video is already like 3/4 of an hour long. I guess that's enough for today. I hope this showed you some cool tricks that you can use to light your scenes, specifically characters in this case. Maybe I'll do another one for whole levels and scenes. Although this probably already gave you some nice ideas and hints on how you can transfer this to, you know, bigger levels. So that's it for now. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something, and see you next time. Bye bye.